Picture an office just before a big meeting. The air is stiff with quiet tension. Papers shuffle, chairs squeak, and the hum of a projector fills the silence. Jake sits at the long conference table, already bracing himself. He knows what's coming, because it happens every week. Across from him is Daniel. Confident, loud, always the first to speak. As soon as the meeting begins, Daniel launches in, interrupting, taking up space, throwing around his opinions like he owns the room. And every time Daniel opens his mouth, Jake feels his jaw tighten, his chest burns with irritation. The more Daniel talks, the more unbearable it becomes. On the surface, Jake tells himself it's simple. Daniel is arrogant, obnoxious, self-centered. That's why he despises him. But one evening, while venting to a friend, Jake is stopped cold. His friend simply asks, "Are you sure you don't do the same thing?" The question lingers like smoke. That night, Jake lies awake, replaying to the meetings. Slowly, painfully, he admits something to himself. He also craves recognition. He also wants his voice to matter. He's just quieter about it. Daniel was showing him the very thing he didn't want to admit about himself. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, had a name for this: the shadow self. Imagine standing beneath a bright noonday sun. Your outline is crisp, your features are clear, but behind you, fused to your heels, stretches a second presence. Dark, quiet, shaped like you but not quite you. It goes where you go. It bends as you bend. You can't peel it off or outrun it. That is how the psyche works too. Carl Jung used the word shadow to describe the parts of a person that don't make it into their preferred picture of themselves. It isn't a villain lurking in the basement. It's more like a storage room for traits we learned were too much, not allowed, or dangerous to love. The contents are personal, but the pattern is universal. Think of childhood like a small stage with bright spotlights. Parents, teachers, and peers clap for certain performances. You're so helpful, such a good boy, what a strong girl, and wince at others. Don't be dramatic. Stop being selfish. Big kids don't cry. Naturally, the child keeps what is applauded in the light and banishes what draws disapproval into the dark. The persona, the mask, forms under the lights. The shadow forms just beyond them. Listen to how this sounds in real lives. Ava grew up praised for being easygoing, calm, unbothered. The message was subtle but clear. Anger makes you difficult to love. As an adult, Ava's shadow holds heat, irritation, boundaries, a sharpened no. When others are blunt or assertive, Ava flinches, because they're speaking a language she never learned she was allowed to use. Marco was the rescuer child. He comforted his mother, entertained his siblings, kept the peace. His persona says, "I am selfless." In his shadow sits a need to be held, to be chosen, to be inconvenient sometimes. When he meets someone unapologetically needy, he bristles. It's not their need he hates, it's his own. Priya was celebrated for discipline, perfect grades, perfect habits, perfect poise. Her shadow stores impulse, play, rest, even laziness. She'll deny all three until a vacation, a weekend, or a late-night scroll slips through her fingers like sand and shame rushes in. She calls it lack of willpower. The psyche calls it an unlived life, trying to breathe. The shadow isn't only personal, it can be collective. Families, communities, and cultures ban certain qualities the way people do. Some neighborhoods worship achievement, but exile tenderness. Some families prize loyalty and silence grief. Wherever a value is overlit, its counterpart falls into shadow. The more the light glares, the darker the contrast behind you. And so the mind learns a handful of moves to manage what's been banished. Repression, pushing a feeling down until it returns as a headache, a tight jaw, a midnight insomnia. Splitting, sorting people and self into all good or all bad to keep complexity at bay. Compensation, overdeveloping a strength to hide a fear. The tireless worker who fears worthlessness. The charming storyteller who fears being ordinary. Identification with the persona. Believing the mask so completely that any contradictory impulse feels like an intruder rather than a part of you. Notice how the body keeps the score. When the shadow stirs, it rarely begins with words. It begins with a sensation, a sudden heat behind the eyes, a knot in the stomach, a rush of indignation so sharp it feels righteous. That's the smoke alarm. Something in you is trying to speak, but it has learned to use alarms instead of sentences. Now, bring Jake and Daniel back into the room. Jake's persona says, "I'm modest. I don't need the spotlight." But under the table, quietly, insistently, his shadow taps a foot. "See me." Daniel's brazen confidence doesn't create Jake's anger. It reveals it. Daniel is the mirror Jake didn't ask for. The office meeting becomes a stage for an older drama. A good boy keeping anger behind his teeth. A quiet child shrinking to be chosen. An adult who forgot that wanting to be recognized is not a sin. Here's the paradox that makes the shadow powerful. It contains both what you fear and what you need. The trait you exiled to survive childhood may be the very one required to live adulthood well. Ava's anger is the seed of her boundaries. Marco's need is the doorway to intimacy. Priya's rest is the soil where joy grows. The shadow is less a dungeon than a seed vault, full of life you saved by hiding. And yet, because it is hidden, it takes the scenic route back to you. You will meet it as irritation at people like that, disdain for that kind of behavior, sudden disgust, and moral superiority that tastes a little too sweet. You'll find it in your jokes, your fantasies, your envy. You'll hear it in the complaint that comes up in every new job, every new city, every new relationship, as if the world keeps sending the same actor in a different costume to play opposite you. It does. The casting director is your unconscious. So when Jung says, shadow, don't picture a monster waiting to pounce. Picture a room you once locked because you were told it was unsafe. Inside are feelings that overwhelm you and talents that embarrass you, impulses that scared your parents, and gifts that threatened your tribe. You locked the door for good reasons, but you are not that child anymore. You can open it now. The persona is the adaptive self you learned to perform. The shadow is the remainder you learned to hide. What the world over-rewards in you becomes your spotlight. Its opposite often becomes your shadow. Your strongest judgments of others frequently trace back to a banished part of you asking to be reclaimed. The shadow is not only your wounds, it's also your untapped vitality. With the room unlocked, the question becomes, how does the shadow try to re-enter life when we won't open the door willingly? Most often, it slips in through the side window of projection, arriving on someone else's face, wearing someone else's voice. Let's step into a few rooms and watch it happen. The most common way the shadow reveals itself is through projection. We don't see these disowned traits in ourselves. We see them in others, often with great intensity. Relationships. Emily was constantly suspicious of her boyfriend. Every late reply, every unexplained delay, she twisted into proof that he was being unfaithful. Her accusations consumed the relationship. But deep down, Emily carried her own guilt. Years before, she had cheated in a past relationship. She never forgave herself, so instead of facing that guilt, she projected it outward. The workplace. Lisa, a department manager, despised lazy employees. She would glare at anyone who left at 5 sharp, muttering that they lacked ambition. But what no one knew was that Lisa lived in fear of being exposed as inadequate herself. She worked late not out of passion, but out of insecurity. The laziness she condemned in others was the part of herself she couldn't accept. Social media. Michael built a following online by mocking influencers, calling them shallow, fake, obsessed with appearances. But if you looked at his own profile, you'd see carefully staged photos, hashtags crafted for likes, and a deep hunger for validation. What he hated in others was precisely what he couldn't admit in himself. Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The shadow is the mirror we try to avoid. So how do we notice the shadow at work? Start by paying attention to your strongest reactions. When something irritates you far beyond reason, when your anger, disgust, or judgment feels oversized for the situation, that's a clue. The shadow is tugging at you. Look for patterns. Do the same types of people trigger you again and again? If so, ask yourself, what do they represent that I can't face in myself? And finally, try the dislike list exercise. Write down 3 people you dislike and the exact traits that bother you most. Then turn the question inward. Where in my life, even in small ways, do I do this too? It doesn't mean you are exactly like them, but it does mean they carry something your unconscious wants you to see. The goal is not to destroy the shadow. It can't be destroyed. The goal is to integrate it. When you acknowledge the parts of yourself you've denied, they stop controlling you from the dark. Anger can transform into healthy assertiveness. Ambition can become drive. Vulnerability can become courage. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Integration begins with honesty. The next time you're triggered, pause. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with them?" ask, "What are they showing me about myself?" Back in the office, Jake began to see Daniel differently. The irritation didn't vanish overnight, but it softened. He noticed that Daniel's boldness was, in part, what he secretly wanted for himself. And in that realization, Daniel stopped being just an annoyance. He became a teacher. That's the paradox of the shadow. The people who irritate us the most often hold the keys to our self-awareness. They show us the parts we've hidden, the truths we'd rather ignore. So the next time someone gets under your skin, remember this. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's your mirror.